Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with the Superlative podcast. My guest today is Roberta Naas. Roberta, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So Roberta is a long-time fixture, really, in my opinion, of the luxury journalism space, not just watches. And I use the term journalism specifically because I remember when I got into this, people kept calling me a journalist. And I was like, I actually did take a bunch of journalism classes, but I don't see myself as a journalist. I'm something else. I, in fact, corrected them in defense of people that were actual journalists. So talk about how did you become a journalist?
Well, it's a long story. I'll make it short. I knew since I was in seventh grade, I wanted to be a writer. And I went for my undergraduate degree in journalism and literature. And then I did my master's degree up at the Newhouse School at Syracuse University in newspaper journalism. And I just love the whole concept of digging out facts, doing investigative reporting, doing long-form journalism. And it was just something that for me flowed. I love the written word. And so that's where journalism came from. If someone had said to me when I was getting my master's degree that I would be writing about watches for the rest of my life, I would have laughed.
Right.
that wasn't in the forecast.
And as is the case with many people who went that traditional journalist route that ended up writing about watches, it was a coincidence, an accident, not something which was planned. I don't know anyone who's like, at least in this for a certain era, was like, I went to school to write about watches or luxury or anything like that.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I thought I was going to save the world somewhere in terms of, writing investigative journalism. And, I did some of those stories for the local paper in Syracuse, but I came back to New York after my family was in Jersey. I came back to New York and opted to go into magazine journalism. I found that newspaper journalism didn't give you enough time to sink your teeth into anything. You had to get that story, get that bone, hurry up, put it out there in the paper, get to the next one. And so
Sounds like blogging.
Yeah. which, yeah. Or social media today, but which we didn't have any of that then. So, yeah, I went into magazines and within a couple of years found myself at National Jeweler magazine, which was the premier magazine then.
And I think it's important to say, especially in today's context, that you're of a generation where going into journalism was a career. There was a lot of paid people, some very well-paid people in the journalistic field. And people went to school because it was a hard thing to do. And professional journalists were preferred over, sort of amateurs. But that's changed today, right?
Absolutely. So much is different today. When I got my degrees, that master's degree made such a difference in the quality of the position that I could get and the quality of the publication. It was necessary to have all of that training and to have gone to one of the best journalism schools in the country. Today, so many people call themselves journalists or are called journalists who have probably never taken a journalism course. They might be watch lovers, they might be watch pundits or critics, and maybe they've even taken some writing classes. I don't know. But today, everybody's just lumped into a category of journalists that wasn't the case in my day.
I remember when I first heard the term social media, in the early 2000s, within minutes, I immediately realized, isn't this the enemy of journalism? Isn't this by definition the antagonistic opposite of journalism? Let's take someone who is responsible, part of a team with a system of checks and balances. Multiple people have to say, okay, that's good to publish. There's, various levels of liability and responsibility to this completely permissive state where the less effort you put into it, somehow the better it is.
When I first heard social media, I said, this is going to be a real problem. This is going to be the end of standards. I think, there's a couple of things here. I think in a way we've all sort of learned to coexist, which is what I guess we need in any industry. But I think for me, I could never give up my standards and my values and my ethics. Pretty much the career I've built has been based on, keeping people's secrets, respecting embargoes, trying to find the right way to break the news. That when I was doing this in the early mid 80s, we were competitors. All of the journalists for the key magazines we could be friends, but we were competitors. It was about who was going to get the best scoop first and who was going to get it to print first. It was real. I don't know if it is anymore. I know that we all look to see who got the story out there first, but the story seems to be so, oh wow, there's a new watch. And I'm guilty of it too, because that is the news right now. But gosh, I just went on and on. Don't know if I even answered your question.
No. I mean, look, I'll tell you something interesting, because I'm sort of on the front lines. I get to see what all the immediate rebuttals to watch journalism, whatever you want to call it, is today. And there is a lot of skepticism when looking at the people that are writing about watches. There's a confusion as to how it all works. There's a lot of visibility on this because we are necessary storytellers. As much as the brands want to think like they can do a lot of stuff, they're still reliant on storytellers. And even if the writers themselves don't have standards, the audience does. And I think that's what's really crucial.
Yes, I agree with that. You mentioned the standards of checks and balances. Everything I used to write had to go through a managing editor, an editor-in-chief, the proofreaders, the copy editors. Today, those standards don't exist. I recently posted on social media this story that I saw the headlines in the papers, and it's a sad story, but it was about a couple who the husband was electrocuted in a hot tub while he was on vacation. And the headline was story of shocking news, man dies in electrocution in hot tub. Shocking electrocution. Who let that go through as a headline on major, internet?
Well, remember, the purpose of a headline has changed from needing to inform to needing to tantalize and tease. The idea is that they want something that creates an emotional reaction that you'll pay attention to. It's no longer about telling any story or fact. There's nothing related to that anymore.
I do agree with that. For this particular instance, I was just talking about the reiteration of shocking and electrocution. The play on words was very bad. Somebody should have pulled the plug. But
I just sound insensitive. That sounds like if I died that way, I wouldn't want someone joking about it.
Right. Well, I don't know if they were. I think that's my point. Is somebody didn't catch this? Yes.
I see what you're saying. I see. Well, and let's sort of move it to the watch space. And I think that this is really important. Buying a expensive thing is scary, and you can really screw up. People who give advice on buying expensive things, in my opinion, owe a huge duty to the people they're talking to, because you're telling people information that's making them spend a huge amount of, not that the information makes them, but they want advice on how to spend properly. I mean, the Financial Times thing, I love that it's called How to Spend It, because it's so direct and to the point and appropriate. But you have this situation where amateurs are touting themselves as experts. Forget that for a moment. But they're telling people out there information that is going to lead to purchases. And if that purchase doesn't make the buyer happy, they're going to be angry at the brand, the retailer, the world. They're not even going to ever remember the person that told them the advice. And I think that that's a problem, because the industry wants to make sure that buyers are happy, because good buyers come back and they buy again. Bad buyers are disgruntled and disenchanted from this whole thing. People buy watches, correct me if I'm wrong, but to feel good about themselves. If they don't feel good as a result of putting all that money into it, they're going to go buy a motorcycle or something, right?
Right.
And so I think that it's important for the industry to make sure that there are standards? Because from what I can see, there's a lot at stake. What do you think?
Well, I think that you have so many different people telling buyers what to buy, where to buy, how to buy. And I question the qualifications of those people who are giving that advice. If you're talking to the head of an auction house, clearly they're going to talk about buying, vintage and buying at auction. If you're talking to a 30-year-old who may not have ever had the means to buy a Richard Mille or, a Patek, how can you take that advice? So I think that our industry as a whole sort of owes it to the buyers to be transparent about our qualifications. What makes us a good enough expert to say, go out and buy this watch now? And I personally try to be impartial. I try not to say, this is a watch you have to have, unless it's just so technically advanced that it is a watch you have to have. But I do feel like, it's the brands are relying on influencers and social media, not just influencers, but just the people who have the followers, just the people who can say, oh, look at this great Citizen watch on one hand. Look at this great Patek Philippe on another. Is that same person qualified for both?
No, I think we agree. I mean, that goes to a whole other topic. But, the more and more I've studied this industry, I've noticed that outside of tolerating a little bit of real journalism inside of Switzerland or inside of France, they have never tolerated actual journalism of their industry from any outside source anywhere ever. Therefore, when they embraced journalism, they just sort of said it with like a wink, like, okay, yeah, that journalism, when they just really meant like, you're going to do marketing for us, right? Like, I don't think they've ever wanted any type of investigative anything ever.
Well, I agree with you there. And I have to say, as you know, I was the first woman watch journalist in America. So I've had to beat down a lot of doors and really change a lot of what I did over the decades. But I have been asked, predominantly told by brands, change this. For instance, I might have an article appear in Forbes, for instance, or even on my own site. You need to change this. This verbiage isn't right. If there's nothing factually wrong with that verbiage and you just don't like it, I'm really sorry, but that verbiage stands. If I called somebody a he and that person was a she, I apologize. Let me fix that. If I have numbers that are
these
wrong.
Are not factual errors. This is something else.
Right. And so I do think the brands, they really just want you to tell their story. They don't necessarily like it when you view their story in a different light and tell the story differently. I may still be promoting your watch, but maybe I didn't tell the story that's ABC you wanted because, hey, I saw the story as, wow, you did this and you're not even acknowledging that. So I do think that there's an onus on us as journalists to read into what we're seeing, to be what we're fed, and not regurgitate it if we can. Put a different slant on it. Put a different edge on it.
Let me ask you this. I don't deny that they do that. I don't like that they do that. And like yourself, I push back as much as I feel I can get away with. But in their minds, this is what I'm curious about what you think. Why do they think that that's appropriate? They're not paying us, right? I think everyone should recognize this isn't like they're paying us for a service and they feel like they're our client and they can ask something. We're doing something literally either paid by someone else or for free, but they still feel like they own a degree of control over the end product. And people aren't that selfish, at least when they think they're doing something. What do they think we're getting out of saying yes to them?
I don't know. I think they being the general brands, and I'm going to really say that not all brands are like this. So many brands are just so grateful that you've given them coverage and they appreciate it. Some brands, they'll say, wow, you really kind of presented that in a light I don't like, but okay. But then those ones that push back, I feel like they're used to being in control. I feel like they are just used to the world bowing down to them. And that means that everybody should. And we shouldn't. We can't. Otherwise,
What
we're
are they
just
actually in control in? I understand that they get to say, hey, team, make the watch we want or do the thing you do. But like, these are all admittedly small companies. The biggest ones are still medium companies in the scheme of things. Where exactly is all this control they're asserting? Where does this come from?
I think it comes from the top. I think it comes from, we want to dictate our message. If you can't tell our message, don't tell our story. But they don't really mean that because they want the story told. I have not written about a particular brand because they really strong-armed me into trying to tell the story their way, and it wasn't the way I saw it. So,
bravo.
Yeah, I haven't covered them in probably a year or more. You know,
yeah, that's the funny thing. If you write about watches for long enough, you have any self-respect, you will inevitably develop a blacklist. Not because you want to, not
right.
because you're blackmailing people, but because they're sort of like unprovoked jerks. And you're like, well, you don't appreciate me. I'm not going to waste my time. It's inevitable that it's sad. I don't know that it happens in other spaces. I know people like, there's a car I'm never going to write about. But it's amazing how these brands will totally mess up an otherwise very beneficial relationship to them. It's like, if you just don't piss us off and make our lives easy, you'll probably get good results. But they can't even figure that out all the time.
Yeah. I think they just want to have too much say. And maybe when you're paying an influencer to put, your product on their social media platforms, or maybe when you're paying a magazine with, back covers, but that's happened forever and ever. Since the dawn of time, publications have had to advertise brands have had to advertise in publications. It's just the way of the world. It comes down to how church and state is that publication.
Well, I think the brands try to knock those walls down. That's what I've sort of noticed for years, is that they don't say, hey, how should we work with you? They try to dictate terms beyond ethical standards. I mean, on a regular basis, I'm still posed with the question, can we just pay you to say good things about us? And I'm like, what year is it? Like, you guys are like, publicly traded. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, how is this that this is your opening salvo? And why isn't it that we're like, you know what, we might say some bad things about you, but overall, what I'm saying to you is that your money is well spent because this will help advance the brand and sell watches. But like, they can't even accept that level of trust. So when you say controlling, I actually hear enormous and deep, really deep levels of distrust. And you probably know that better than anyone else.
I don't know that I do. I think that, and I'm going to say this probably out loud here for the first time, I'm marking 40 years in this industry. So I think that after 40 years, I have such a respect in the industry, and I'm not blowing my own horn. I'm just saying I don't even sign NDAs most of the time anymore. I just talk with the brands. I just, they respect
Man, do they love NDAs now. I don't know why. It's like the biggest fad. They're like,
we
going to lunch.
Can
you sign the NDA?
We didn't have them before. But
sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. But I mean, that's it. Once you've built your whole reputation on your morals and your ethics, I think the brands trust you enough to say, I'm giving you this. I trust where you're going to go with this. Sometimes that's a really big trust, because sometimes I don't see what they see. And then I have to go back and say, this isn't the story. And I've done it. This isn't the story you think it is. I know in your world, in your brand, this is a really big story. In my world, this is just not I can't cover this.
You mean opening up a store in a D-grade city isn't like headline news? What? I love what they think should pass for actual newsworthiness. It's kind of amusing, isn't it?
I think they just really believe it's news. And then you have PR people and brand executives who really get it, who really understand. Hey,
there are a few. That's right.
Yes,
just a few.
And you know what? I respect those people, because they're not trying to make your job harder. They're just trying to say, I'm supposed to give you this information. What you do with it is up to you. I love that,
that 5% makes it worth it. But there's the other ones. And just the other day, I was talking with my team, and there was a brand, not a big brand, a very small one. They're like, oh, maybe we should work with them. And I was like, no, I don't want to work with those people because had a bad experience. And it was like 5 years ago. So I pulled up like the message thread. And I remember specifically saying things to them like, you do not understand how we work. It was, this guy got like really, really emotional because I didn't tell, as you said, the story his way. Again, there's no marketing relationship, no money being exchanged, nothing being exchanged in any way here. And the person just didn't feel that I was literally promoting the brand enough. And I asked him in the thread, I was like, did I say something that was incorrect? Was there a factual error? I would be happy to correct it. And he's like, no, there's just sort of like intangible things that you basically need to express. I'm like, you mean tell everyone how amazing your watch brand is without any evidence? That's what you mean by the intangible? And I was like, I remember thinking like, there's no point in ever working with people like this. If this is their opening part of the relationship is being so difficult when all we've done is give them value. It's just so easy for me to say no. And I think that's one of the things that for me has been a benefit is that I'm actually okay completely not talking about certain brands. And I'll tell you why. Yes, there's news missing, but I see that their relationship with you and I is sort of an extension of the relationship with the consumer. If they can't get the relationship with us right, they're probably not going to deliver a relationship to the consumer that we would want to promote or validate or defend. And we know about how bad things can be with service or being snooty in the stores. And so I feel very confident saying, if you can't get it right with me and you treat me in a way that turns me off, I'm going to assume that it's a good idea to not let audience members know about you because they might also have a bad experience. And there's so many other watch brands out there. I've never been in a deficit for things to write about. I'm sure you as well. Maybe for years you thought about this, but have you ever found like, oh, I don't have any watches to write about? There's always more to cover than you can.
Yeah, there's way more. A lot of times I wake up and I say, today I'm not going to write about a new watch. I'm going to write about a concept. I'm going to write about not necessarily a trend, but I'm going to find a story to tell that's different because there's a plethora of watches out there to cover. And it's hard to find the stories, especially for the important, like the New York Times, or again, I go back to like Forbes or even pitching publications like Bloomberg. They're looking for something so specific for their readers. And it's not just a new watch. They really want stories that are different. And so you really have to seek out those stories. And those are the ones that give me the most pleasure to write. I've written a half a dozen books on watches. I am due to write a couple of more. But when I write a really good story that sort of digs open the industry a little bit and exposes our needs and our concerns, I think those are the stories that I'm most proud of.
So, and I agree, those are the most satisfying to tell. Now, I've thought about this myself, and I'm sure you have as well. You have, far more experience than me in the space. There's a story about the watch industry to tell to the mainstream, right? Like not just for collectors and geeks and luxury lovers. There's stories that are relevant to the mainstream about the watch industry, but it really depends on how to tell them, how to sort of narrow the topic. What do you think are some of the stories or things that have been happening in the watch industry since you've been in it that the mainstream needs to know? And how would you position that towards them? Because I think it's very easy to just be too esoteric.
That's an interesting question. I've watched this industry grow and morph and change. I've watched, unfortunately, amazing brands go under. I was there, when I joined the industry, I was told I couldn't be a watch editor because there'd never been a woman, and the Japanese were more important than the Swiss because it was, the quartz era. So I've watched really phenomenal brands like Universal Genève and others go under because of.
Well, that brand's coming back.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how that comes back. But I've watched them morph. I've watched the brands that have led the charge to the large watches in the 90s and the early 2000s with the independents. Independents weren't, back when I joined, those independents were the guys that were making the watches for all the brands, and their names weren't discussed. Movement types weren't discussed. If you made your own movement or somebody else made it for you in an atelier around the corner, this was never a topic. This is relatively recent. And now, like, as we're seeing this return to the smaller, thinner, more classic watches, that's just because nanotechnology has reached a point where we can make the watches smaller and thinner. And so why spend all this money on huge materials and big watches? So I know I digressed there, but
No, this is great.
but the changes I've seen over 4 decades are almost mind-boggling. And with that, journalism has changed. It used to be blue lines and paper proofs, and I learned how to measure and size pictures on a Pica ruler before we had slides, and the means of communications to get our materials to our publishers were delivery services and telefax, and now we just do everything with a press of the button on the computer or the phone. So every aspect of the industry has changed over the last 4 decades, and I really question where will it go next? Like, what do you think of?
It's unpredictable. The thing I know about what's happening next is it's a moving target, meaning right now we're in a transitional era. There's nothing settled now, and there are so many variables in terms of how people learn about watches, how people search about watches, how people pay for watches, how people transact for watches. All these variables are a moving target. And because they're all different, we don't even know what industrial capacity will be left in 20 years. We don't know if a lot of these micro brands will even have places to make their watches. So there's so many huge unknowns. All I can say is people will want watches. I don't know what they'll buy or who will make it or at what price, but they will want watches.
Right.
But speaking of things that have changed, one of the things I think is so important today is that despite the fragility of watch media, it is where people discover brands and discover products that they buy. The vast majority of people today learn about a watch or brand initially, through media, usually on the internet. Maybe they decide to buy it for a different reason later, but the initial discovery is happening in this space. In the 1980s, I don't think that was true. There wasn't online journalism. There wasn't watch media publications. Where were people fundamentally learning about the watches that they would end up buying in the 80s and 90s?
Advertising. I feel that back in the 80s and the 90s, billboard advertising was huge for watch brands. And magazine advertising was 20 times greater than what it is now. Retail jewelry stores were a breed that was all about helping to educate their consumers. Yes, there were shows, but they were meant for trade. The shows then weren't open to the public. So the brands really had to get their story out through the journalists. And they had to get their stories out through their advertising media and through word of mouth. And the big luxury stores like Neiman Marcus, and that's where you told the stories, and you hope that the world would pick them up in terms of newspapers and magazines. And that has significantly changed.
Was that successful? Meaning, I agree that there was a lot more advertising, and that's a whole other topic. I think they should return to that. But would you say that was successful for them? Were they selling a lot at the time?
Well, again, I came in at the quartz era, so we were seeing such a shift in the late 80s in terms of what people were buying, because suddenly we had Nick Hayek, who I knew well, senior. He unveiled the Swatch watch, and for the first time, other than America having LED and LCD watches, people were looking at watches as accessories, and it was a big deal back then to own 4 or 5 watches. It was a big deal. So, did it work for them, the advertising and the marketing and trying to, get those stories out there? It did, but did they sell watches? It was such a transition time frame that certain brands did amazingly well and other brands just didn't. And that did change with the advent of the independent watch brands and the advent of the bigger watches and Swiss becoming more important again. Not that the Japanese weren't as important anymore, but they regained their foothold. I mean, I've had the privilege of meeting so many amazing people in this industry who really ushered in. I knew Gerald Genta. I met with him regularly. He was like a kid in the candy shop when he talked about his watches. As I said, Nick Hayek, like all of these players were voices, but they were still not as visible as the voices that we have today in the industry.
Now, I want to go back to the advertising that used to be so prolific, and this is a small point, but I think important. Was it the brands themselves that were putting these ads up, or was it the retailers and the department stores that were selling them? Do you happen to know?
There was a lot of co-op back then. In the late 80s, early 90s.
Meaning that they would share. For those that don't know, meaning they would share the...
Sorry, yes. Meaning they would share with the retailers. And that was the era of, we called them CSMs, catalog showrooms. We don't even have them anymore. But they were, just these almost from the old-fashioned Sears catalogs, mail order, or, you'd get this big catalog from one of the catalog showrooms and you'd go in and you'd stand at a window and you'd buy your watch or your piece of jewelry. They were huge advertisers. And so the brands would get a lot of business through working with their bigger department stores. They had lease departments back then that would work with the department stores and be the middleman between the brand and the department store. So it was across the board. I think the really high-end luxury brands still did their own advertising more so than work with the retailers.
I guess part of my question has to do with why they made such an abrupt shift, because advertising has always been really crucial part of selling luxury watches in the modern era. It has been the primary way of not just generating demand, but getting people sort of excited about it and wanting people to go out and hunt for more information. But the industry, every time I notice, does everything possible to avoid advertising. And I know that they don't like spending money, but intellectually, I can't reconcile the idea that it has such a history of being effectiveness with them wanting to do everything to avoid doing it. And again, I can't quite reconcile that.
Well, I think a good portion of that isn't that they're not advertising. It's that even their venues, in defense of the brands and the publications, their venues have changed. Let's not forget that we had a huge falling out of magazines during the, some of the economic downturns and crises. And so publications that were in existence suddenly weren't anymore. Publications that used to have a lot of watch advertising were turning to maybe the spirits or the cigars or the larger paying, bigger companies that could command the ads and pay the prices for some of these really terrific luxury niche magazines that today have lost their foothold. They still have great readership and great advertisers, but not in the watch world. And I think it's just the playing field changed.
Well, let me be the devil's advocate here, because for years, especially as I came in as digital media, brands would really espouse the virtues of print. They loved it. They loved you could touch it. They didn't care there was lower numbers. But the moment they had an opportunity to stop supporting with money, they did. Mm-hmm. So they love these things, but you talk to a lot of the publications, especially the ones that were luxury publications, many of them, even if their topic wasn't just watches, were primarily, basically funded by watch brand advertisers. Watch brands, despite their love of them, almost within a 5-year period of time, completely stopped supporting any of them at all. And again, I'm not saying they should have not done it, but it seems a bit duplicitous when they genuinely love these print publications and then genuinely stop caring about if any of them existed.
Well, I think you just said two important things. One is, I don't know that they totally stopped. You know, you look at a Town and Country, you look at some of the luxury publications out there, even like on the men's side, GQ, they're still getting watch advertising. Maybe not as much as they did, but they're still getting watch advertising, because I do think that
there's a trickle. There's a trickle.
And some have more than others, obviously, but I do think the brands love that. Just like watch lovers love the see, touch, feel, brands like print. But as you said, digital has really come into play in such a huge way. And if you're going to put your money into a digital platform where maybe some of these luxury publications have millions of readers on their digital platforms and their social media platforms, suddenly the price is better and the deal seems better. And so I think that has helped to shift the world and the advertisers.
Yeah. Again, it's just an interesting conversation, because it kind of happens and changes before your eyes. You don't necessarily know why it's happening. The brands find themselves in a position so alien than where they were, even 15 or 20 years ago. And it's worth discussing, like, well, this is what you guys used to do. You always wonder, how did they do those things? Well, that's how they achieve those results.
Right.
All these brands want to be Rolex, but nobody wants to spend like Rolex. I'm like, well, what is it you think it takes? Is it about copying the look of Rolex? Is that how you think they got there? Trust me, it wasn't the design that made Rolex popular. They're just watches.
Well, I think the other thing that we are forgetting, and that has morphed over the years, is the realm of, I guess it's twofold. One is the trips, the whole concept of bringing editors onto trips to experience the brand, to then go back and tell the story.
That's all done.
Well, it still happens out there, but
the experience, trip happens, experience not so much.
Yeah, well, okay, we're not going to go there, but what I'm saying is that has changed. And the other thing that I think brands used to do more of was they opened their doors more to the CEOs and the executives. I used to be able to have sit-down conversations with almost any CEO of almost any watch brand, including Rolex, including the Swatch Group, including Richemont. They've it goes back to control again. They've funneled that down to a point where you can only get an interview if you have some major story you're telling, and you have to produce where it's going to go, why it's important, what your questions are ahead of time. I never did that before. You went in and you interviewed by the seat of your pants. And so I do think that now brands are spending a little bit more money on trying to bring editors to their factories, trying to bring editors to experience whatever they're involved in, whether it's America's Cup sailing or some of their sponsors, partners. And that's another thing that has changed significantly, is that involvement. Brand ambassadors, there weren't very many back 35 years ago. Now they're a thing, and the partnerships and working with artists. And so I think the brands have had to branch out, and they're spending their money on those other areas, such as partnerships and relationships and ambassadors. And that obviously eats into their advertising dollars.
Speaking of spending money, I want to shift the conversation over to some recollections of Baselworld. Now, I started going to Baselworld, I think, at sort of the tail end of what was really sort of a glamorous era. And I want people that remember the glory days of Baselworld to share stories about what that was like. I think what I want people to know was the opulence, both in the show and out of the show, the sort of over-the-top nature of things. There was sort of this interesting energy. You don't feel any of that at a Watches and Wonders today. Not that the show is bad, but it does not represent those things. Tell some of your most poignant memories or things that come to mind when you think about the heyday of Baselworld.
There are so many. Baselworld was it was just incredible from so many perspectives. You did have jewelry together and watches together and machinery and tools, and, but they were all separate. And if we just focus on the watch world, it was a huge, and it grew and grew and grew. I mean, and the halls themselves grew and they refurbished and redid them. But in the early days, brands didn't have 2-story and 3-story tall booths.
Buildings, really?
Yes, eventually they did. But in the early days, you could walk in and gape in a window, and they put their new watches in the windows. Not like today, they hide them in the back. You could just see everything. You had access. You could walk in and say, hey, I want to talk to whoever's in charge here in the American market and get the CEO or get the president. And the parties were lavish. They were over the top in terms of just not having to put on a show except for Breitling, but having everybody there, having a good time, letting your hair down and forgetting that you worked all day and you're going to work all day tomorrow and you're going to do this for 7 more days. It was just a time for camaraderie. There was an amazing camaraderie in our industry that is still there, but not like it used to be. So you could, there was an accessibility that you didn't have, that you don't have any longer, or even toward the end of Basel World. It was just one of the most amazing showcases for timepieces that ever existed. And I was sad to see it go. I was not surprised. It was morphing toward the end. We don't need a zillion presentations and panel discussions and round tables. Nobody has time to do everything. And I think they were trying, Basel World Fair Management was trying to emulate what was happening at SIHH. But even the early SIHH days were more like Basel than they are, Watches and Wonders. In the early days, Watches and Wonders was SIHH. And it was more accessible back then, too. Now we just have a lot of planning and organization, and maybe that's what's required today.
Well, a lot of it is the bare minimum. And I think what's been missing, and I tell brands this, is that in a world like today, where the lifestyle that you're selling into doesn't really exist in a lot of people's lives, you have to create it. You have to make the fun experiences that your watches would be appropriate at, because not enough of them exist organically. And that is your responsibility. You need to bring people into your world, show them what it's like, and allow them to understand that this watch is celebratory of that. And that's, I think, where they have not really picked up that responsibility, because I think we'll agree, the world has changed around us. Even today, people have far fewer reasons to just sort of celebrate, and there's far less opportunities to take celebratory gear. The brands themselves, if they want that to be a thing, have to do it themselves. And they did that for a long time. But for whatever reason, they just sort of decided to stop, thinking that someone else would pick up the slack, which of course they haven't.
I think people still celebrate, but I think the younger people of today are faced with so many more important issues. Just the whole socioeconomic world that we're living in, where, I don't know how many 30-somethings are going to be able to afford a house with house prices and interest rates. And, so are you really going to go out and buy yourself a $100,000 watch when you can't even buy a house for you and your new partner to live in? So I mean, there is celebration. I believe there is celebration. But I just
There's
think
always some, but you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. I just don't think it's as lavish as it once was. Unless you're in a certain lifestyle.
Yeah. And if you're in that lifestyle, you only have a certain capacity, right? You're like, there's only so many luxury goods I can use to celebrate myself. I think the brands today have a problem because they keep trying to sell to the same person over and over again. They sort of abandoned the idea of the mass. They're like, oh, selling to mainstream folks, it's too hard. They're too finicky. Let's find this one small group of people and just sell to them over and over and over and over again. And I don't really think that's just too sustainable either.
No, I agree with you. And I do see a lot of that higher end, over $10,000 price range brands are suddenly realizing, wow, we need to reach a younger customer. We need to reach a different customer. And we're seeing some watches creep down in prices. And by the same token, I will not discount all of those amazing brands out there that are selling watches for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, like Oris and Tudor and well, maybe, a little more than that. And Bulova and Citizen. I mean, they've got something that works and they're reaching the masses. I think that we've all gotten so caught up in luxury that we forget that there is more than just luxury out there. And some people want to watch that's only a few $1,000s. Some people want to watch that's only a few hundred.
I mean, look, the bottom line is that the thought process, the mentality is exactly the same for someone who, for $3,000, that's a huge spend to them, than for someone who's $30,000 or $300,000. Each of those people knows what their affordability is, and each of those wants to deliver the same experience. The problem is there's way more people out there who can reach to $3,000 versus $30,000 or $300,000. And so when brands say we want to reach younger people, I'm sorry, that's just coded language for we want to reach people who can afford less. And I have to keep reminding them, well, then you need to charge less, right? Because what we've seen is they've tried to do like wild designs and hip ambassadors, but still at very high prices. And I'm like, no, it does not work that way. Like, young people in their 20s are so intimately aware of what they can and can't afford, right? They might want it, but they're so aware of what they can and can't afford. They're not going to stretch themselves and take out debt to buy a watch. And that's something that I think was insane. Brands actually were assuming that people were taking out debt to buy a watch, which is one of the most reprehensible things I can imagine.
Right. No, I agree. And I think that's where some of that, some of those brand partnerships to launch a new watch just didn't make a lot of sense to me earlier this year and last year. They just didn't. Why are you teaming with them? You had a great watch. You could have just come out with that watch in and of itself and not spent the money on a partnership and have to charge more for the timepiece.
You knew Hayek Sr. well. He's someone that, I think needs to be talked about more because he set certain things in motion, cultural elements, statements, ideas that are perpetuated, though not often attributed to him. And I keep wondering what he would do in today's era, right? This is someone who, it was a consortium of people, but he was there to sort of save the watch industry. He was like the master pivoter. He understood pivoting. And if there's anything this industry is good at, is its sort of agility to be able to pivot, but it's always dependent on those people with vision, right? Those special personalities that can see beyond what happens now, see beyond that sort of factory industrial mentality, and see what the watch industry could be. And I just wonder what him or someone like him would think nowadays. His family, for whatever they're good at, I think they'll even admit they lack that vision. They're not sure what to do. Knowing what you knew about him, how do you think he might respond to 2024?
He was a mover and a shaker. We had a few of them back then. We had some great people in the industry. We still do. We still have a lot of really important decision makers and leaders. But he had such an insight to the business side of things. When he brought these brands together under an umbrella and said, we are all going to work together because it's the only way we're going to save the Swiss watch industry. His vision was above and beyond just his few brands. It was the entire industry. He had the concept that let's do swatch watches. Let's do inexpensive watches. Let's find a way. Granted, it was part of his group, but others could take that lead and follow. So what would he do today? I think he would have been making changes every 10 years along the way anyway. I don't think that we would be stuck here suddenly saying 25, 35 years later, what would he do 25 years later? But But he would be looking at everything as a whole. He would be saying, what our industry needs is to do A, B, and C, and I'm going to lead the charge. Would he embrace social media the way we are? Would he want to see it destroyed? I think he would know it's the way of the future. He might be the one embracing AI today and saying, okay, I'm going to use AI to send different messages out there. He's probably the one that would be making, 3D printed watches. I just don't know, but I attribute so much of the industry's survival to him, and that's not displaced.
I think what's interesting that you reminded me about was his consolidation efforts, where he basically said, in order for us to get through this, we have to chart a joint journey. And today we see quite the opposite. We see so much fragmentation. And a good example is, how people want to sell watches. Do they sell it themselves? Do they only sell it themselves? Do they sell it wholesale? What kind? Do they sell used watches themselves? And the various paths to making watches, as well as getting it on people's wrists, as well as communicating about it, makes for a marketplace that's so fragmented. You have certain brands who've just decided to be like, you know what, we don't even want to associate ourselves with the industry because we don't even want to be compared to price. I think Audemars Piguet is a good example. It's a cool brand, make lovely stuff, but they basically said, we don't want to be compared to other watches because we don't want our prices compared. We're going to position ourselves as being a completely different category. We don't ever want people to see our watches in the same store as competitors' watches. We just want to be sold in this sort of isolated silo of the house that is Audemars Piguet, which again is the exact opposite of the sort of consolidation, let's work together elements. And so I wonder how we again reconcile the idea that to survive a tumultuous time, people have to agree on a joint journey versus what we have today, which is everyone is like, no, I don't have to even do business the same way as my colleague, even though we're all watch brands. It's an interesting perspective, right?
Yeah, I think though that you'd be surprised behind the scenes which large independent watch brands such as Audemars Piguet or Chopard or Patek or Rolex. You'd be surprised how much these brands' leaders talk to one another. How much they say.
Oh, I know. They're on speed dial.
Yeah. How much they all say, well, what do you think? And let's make a decision together as a cohesive front.
But wait, Roberta, you're totally right historically, but look at some of the very public fights, right? Like Rolex's feud with other brands, like even just 3 years ago, never, ever, ever. Now, like, I think you're starting to see real conflict between them. So you're right. It used to be very cozy behind the scenes, and it mostly is that way. But will you admit that there's fractures in the wall?
Yes. Absolutely. I'm not sure that we need to stick a thumb in to stop the dam yet, but yeah, there are definitely fractures, and you're right. I mean, it blows my mind to see how certain brands have just eschewed the concept of a retailer, and they're sort of the backbones that built these brands, and so I mean, there's so many different ways to sell now, and so many different delivery systems. And I think that the brands have to, I appreciate and applaud the brands that say, we're working with retailers. We're not going to bypass the people that built us. And I think that's a really important aspect.
Yeah, I want to point that out. And it's not because us journalists, I'm just collectively calling us that right now, us watch media people, are particularly tied in with retailers at all. In fact, most of us make very little money, if anything, from retailers. All of us seem to agree that the watch industry is at a disadvantage by abandoning the third-party retailer. We all seem to intuitively feel that by not working with them, by not allowing them to represent and share and take care of elements of the market, brands are doing something foolish. Maybe there's some short-term gains, but in the long run, they're going to be losing market share. They're going to be losing importance. They're going to be losing sales. And it's an interesting thing for us to see. We have no power to control any of it, But we see more and more brands taking this direct-to-consumer approach, and we see struggles at retailers of trying to figure out what to do. And we know that if they just stuck to the wholesale model, that would work for maybe not all of them, but like probably most of them. So it's an awkward thing to sort of sit back and see that. And am I wrong? Do we have colleagues that think direct-to-consumer is the way to go?
I think we do. That's why we've got them. I don't know if a brand like AP, who is, trying to do everything themselves through their own stores, are they losing sales? I don't know that they are. Are they losing identity? I don't think so. So, they've got their reasons. They might not be the reasons that I agree with or you agree with, but
we feel like they lose something. And we also feel, don't you agree that like maybe they're doing well now, but is there sustainability of this model 10 years down the line? I mean, this is an industry that has to think long term.
This is an industry that has to think long term. That's absolutely true. I don't know how many leaders today have that long term vision.
When you're writing for a consumer audience today, what are the stories you feel is most important to them? Because like you, I'm starting to get a little bit tired of just the constant new releases all the time. I know why brands do that. It's a whole different story. But what do you think consumers need to know about if you could have your way? Obviously, brands don't always want that. But if you could have your way, what stories would you be talking about again and again to a consumer audience?
I think it's important. I think that, wow, that's a loaded question.
Not trying to be.
I think there are so many layers of stories out there. It's important to address what's happening in our industry in terms of manpower shortage, in terms of even part shortages. I mean, if you're a big brand, you can go to a company that makes tiny screws and say, I'm buying all your screw production for the next five years. And suddenly these little independents who have a really nice business can't get their hands on the parts they need to make their movements, to make their watches. So they're squeezing them out. I feel like we need more transparency about the issues within the industry. I did a huge story on the shortage of manpower, just in terms of watchmakers for the New York Times, and it was very well received. But it was like pulling teeth to get the interviews because nobody really wanted to bare their souls. So I feel like consumers are always being fed the good. They're always being shown the luxury, the beauty, the elegance. But I think going behind the scenes and saying there are struggles too, I feel like that's a story that needs to be told. And everything can't be sugar-coated. It just can't be, beautiful chocolate ice cream all the time, or vanilla, or whatever you like. We have to kind of show the reality of it. And the same is true with the whole sustainability subject, which was a really big story. And then suddenly we're dialing that back. And why are we dialing that back? Because maybe everybody can't achieve what they said they were going to achieve.
You remember how skeptical I was about that from the beginning.
Yeah. And I also love certain other stories in our industry, and especially because I am at this stage in my career, I love the newness coming out in the market today, where you have like Renault and Tixier, and you have young watchmakers working together with the senior experienced people, and how they're bringing things together. And what does that mean? Yes, you have Biver with his son, but I'm talking about the brands that are looking to work with each other for the greater good of what a watch can be. So yeah, there's a lot of stories that excite me.
A lot of stories. I want to mention something interesting about those young watchmakers, because I agree, that's where a lot of the excitement is, and some of the things they're coming out with is amazing. But I've interviewed a lot of these guys, and most of them admit that if they just could have found a supportive job at an existing brand, they would have taken it. They start up their brands not because of any type of desire to be the guy in charge hero, but because they can't find a suitable career that allows them to do anything of interest or importance at one of the major watch brands. And so I see this as being part of the human resources issue you talked about, where if you're a talented person with any drive or vision or creativity, there's almost no room for you to thrive in one of the big brands. And that's a huge problem. these people should be doing this as part of their retirement. But if they're going straight out of school into trying to do it just for themselves, they don't even know what they're doing half the time, right? Like they don't even come out with the watches that make sense. The brands need to create jobs for these people that seem desirable because they'll help you, brands, right? They will help you fix some of your problems and approach those young people that Roberta said is important, right?
It's true. It's really true. And I think that a lot of that goes back to the fact that years ago, watchmakers never got the glory, but now, not that they're looking for that recognition, but when you've created one of the most complicated, expensive, exquisite watches in the world, when you've done something that's a world's first, do you really just want to be, our watchmakers did this, a part of the watchmaking team, or do you want to shine? And that's why I think so many people have gone outside.
I hear you. But honestly, if I push deep, it's because they can't be creative. It's the stifling nature. It's the idea that I have all these ideas and I'm shot down all the time. I'm not allowed to explore. If someone pays you well, nobody cares if people know your name, right? It's that they can't do anything. They're literally sitting in a box. And I think a lot of them see people that would go like at Audemars Piguet and be their creative director. It's like, wait a minute, you've done nothing after being here for 7 years. You've introduced a color, right? Or a slight different finishing. And that's stifling because if you're someone that wants to make new things and dazzle the audience, they intuitively know what the consumer wants. Yet the brands literally say, no, don't do that. And they say no again and again and again. And it's like all the creative marketing people. If you're a creative marketing person in the watch industry, you're there for about 3 weeks before you realize, wait a minute, no one will let me do a thing.
I think that's true. And then I think there are brands where that's not true. That
don't have the money to actually do it. They're like, great, do it all for free. Just, and then the ones that can afford it is like, no research and development budget at all.
Many, many years ago, probably before anybody in the watch world did it, I struck out on my own. I decided, okay, I love writing for publications, but I'm going to do this as a freelancer. I don't think, this was 32 years ago. I don't think anybody was a full-time freelance journalist back then, especially in the watch industry.
Right.
But I did it because I didn't want to be stifled. It's similar. When you write for one publication, you can only do what that one publication wants. You need creative license. You need freedom. And so that is probably why a lot of people branch out. That's why I did. And to this day, I write for dozens of different magazines, newspapers, my own site. I've written books. It's such a rewarding experience. And I would encourage young people of today to do that, to follow in those footsteps and try and be everything you want to be.
Great advice, Roberta. We're about out of time. Just please remind people, tell them where they can learn more about you and read your work on the internet.
Oh, well, there's a timelyperspective.com, which is my own site. And certainly I write for a myriad of publications. You'll find me on Wikipedia, but Forbes, the New York Times, and a few other really important publications like Elite Traveler. And by listening to your podcast.
Thank you. This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with Roberta Naas. Roberta, thank you so much.
Thank you.